Every week at my house on a Friday is a very special occasion. We call it pizza movie night. It's very important that it's not pizza and movie night. We just call it pizza movie night. And this last week, this last Friday, our movie of choice was in honor of Christmas was Home Alone. We love that movie. We love the bumbling wet bandits. We love the alarm clock mix up, and we love the strategies of home defense that come from the mind of an 8-year-old. There's this iconic scene very early on in the movie where Kevin's family accidentally leaves him behind, and Kevin wakes up in the morning and there's nobody around. And if you've seen the movie, you know that the night before, he had had a big fight with his family and with his mom, and it ends up with him in anger and frustration saying, "I hope that I never see any of you jerks again." And so he's walking through the house, those words are in his mind, and gradually he realizes that he's all alone. He goes to the kitchen and he sits down at the table and he says in this shocked voice, "I I made my family disappear." And then there's this right after that, there's this scene where he's thinking through all of the ways that his family members have wronged him. Some of their words are going through his mind. And finally, his shock begins to turn to joy, and he smiles and he says, "I made my family disappear." And what happens right after that is the music starts playing, and Kevin ends up building a new life for himself. He builds the life that he's always dreamed of. He gets to do all of the things that he had never gotten to do before. He's jumping on his parents' bed while eating popcorn and spilling it everywhere. He's running through the halls screaming. He's rifling through his brother's possessions. He watches the shows and the movies that he wants to watch, and he orders the cheese pizza that he loves so much. Even toward the end, he begins to build community and friendship with a neighbor that he had previously feared. To this point, Kevin's life had been shaped by his family. And and after the miracle of his family's vanishing, he takes that opportunity and he builds the life that would really matter to a kid. In chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes, where we're going to be today, the teacher of Ecclesiastes kind of meets a very similar moment. If Ecclesiastes were a song, the chorus would be vanity. This is meaningless. That over there, that's meaningless too. And as the teacher sees life under the sun, imagine that each thing he sees that's meaningless begins to fade away. Pleasure is meaningless and it fades away. Possessions are meaningless and they fade away. Pursuits are meaningless, they fade away. Wealth, power, they're all meaningless and they fade away. And the teacher reaches a point of like a blank canvas. Picture like a solitary man in a bare landscape. Like Kevin in his empty house. In Ecclesiastes 4 and 5, the teacher begins to build a new life. Now, unlike Kevin, who builds on the foundation of an 8-year-old's pleasure and hedonism, the writer of Ecclesiastes, he's going to build a foundation on wisdom. He's going to build what a meaningful life looks like. And what he discovers is that in a world where so much proves empty, true wisdom builds a meaningful life through connection with others, through a steady cadence to our days, and through communion with the God above the sun. Join me in Ecclesiastes 4, starting in verse 9 here. The teacher says, "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The first thing that the teacher adds to this blank canvas that he has, the first element that he adds back to a meaningful life is people. He says that wisdom is connection with others. It's shared strength, shared strength. After everything else has faded, pleasures, projects, possessions, pursuits, he looks around at the empty landscape and almost with relief, he says, but two is better than one. Out of all of the vanity, he says, two is better than one. These verses are among some of the most familiar in Ecclesiastes. Maybe the verses from a few weeks ago would be more common, but these are very common, and sometimes they're ripped out of their context. They can be used at weddings. That's okay. It's not quite what he's talking about here. Sometimes it gets put on Hallmark cards, and that's okay too. But that's not exactly what the writer of Ecclesiastes has in mind. He's not picturing a romantic scene here. He's picturing life under the sun. He's picturing the harshness, the uncertainty, the vulnerability of real human existence. And in that world, the first thing that wisdom insists on is that you cannot flourish alone. You can't flourish alone. The teacher here is reminding us of something that God built into creation itself. Before sin entered the world, before brokenness, before vanity or failure, God looked at the man that he had made and declared something not good, right? Genesis 2 says it is not good for man to be alone. And that declaration from God is not simply it's not just a statement about marriage. It's a statement about design. You and I are not engineered for isolation. And yet that's where life can often push us, doesn't it? It can push us toward isolation. Busyness isolates us. Shame isolates us. Pride isolates us. Wounds isolate us. Our world actually rewards autonomy. Our world honors independence, but it quietly suffocates us with loneliness. When the teacher rebuilds this life under the sun, he says, start here. Start with shared life. Start with connection. And he gives us three images here. And let's go through these real slowly. In verses 9 and 10, he says, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. The image here is agricultural work, manual labor. Growing up in my house, we did a lot of manual labor. The picture he has here is of a vineyard, a hillside, a field, the kind of work under the sun that breaks the laborer's back, especially a solitary worker. But two laborers can do twice the work. And even more than that, more than twice the work. They multiply each other's strength. Because it's not just that the work takes half the time because there's two people, but there is an encouragement there. There's a mutual motivation that results from having someone else alongside of us. The time may be cut in half, but even our experience of life's labors change when we're not alone. And then he gives his first warning here. The teacher says, for if they fall, one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. In the ancient world, in the day of the teacher of Ecclesiastes, falling down wasn't just embarrassing. This isn't just tripping over a step, maybe taking a little tumble. It wasn't just embarrassing, it could be dangerous, it could be deadly. Terraced fields had drop-offs. You could twist your ankle on rocks if you were by yourself, not be able to walk. The problem, and then even the teacher says that life is full of pits. Now, pits are not the problem here. The teacher says the problem is falling into one, not having anyone to pull you back up. This is profoundly pastoral because some of us are walking around with a quiet fear inside, a quiet fear that if we fall, what if I fall? Maybe it's spiritually or emotionally or physically. No one's going to notice. No one will come. No one will lift me up. The scriptures say that this is not a wise life. Wisdom links arms with our brothers and sisters. And so let me ask you this today. Who is close enough to you to see when you are slipping? Who has access to your life in such a way as to interrupt your fall? Who can tell you the truth when you'd rather be left alone? The next image. The next image is shared warmth. The teacher asking in verse 11, how can one keep warm alone? And again, this image is not about romance, okay? Not about a couple snuggled in their bed. This is actually about survival on the road. Travelers in the ancient Near East, they walked long distances through desert conditions where oftentimes at night the temperatures would plummet. To stay warm, people slept close, not sexually, but communally. Over the past 5 years or so, I have enjoyed very much solo camping trips that I like to take. Each time, not by design, but each time it seems like I always end up camping in near freezing or sub freezing temperatures. Okay. My personal record is 25 degrees. I'm sure some of you have probably beaten that, but that's the coldest night I slept in a tent was 25 degrees. At that temperature, hypothermia sets in within about 30 minutes. And I know what you're saying. You're like, Pastor Ben, I thought we were talking about wisdom here. That seems profoundly stupid, right? And we can debate that. We can debate that. But one thing that I've discovered is it's actually pretty easy. It's pretty easy to prepare to sleep in the cold for a night or 2 nights. But the point is that you may be able to survive the harshest moments of life for a time, for a night, but you cannot survive for a season. And maybe for you right now, life is just fine. But the teacher says the seasons of life will change. Life will get cold. Suffering chills the soul. Grief chills the soul. Discouragement drains the heat of hope. You can withstand a cold season if someone is with you, but if you're alone in the dark, even a small storm can become life threatening. Friends, some of us are shivering spiritually, but still trying to tough it out. And wisdom whispers, draw close. Let someone near enough to warm your faith. This is why the New Testament calls the church a body, a family, living stones. This is why Hebrews says, do not neglect to meet together, but encourage one another. You see, the warmth of shared faith is not optional, it's necessity. His final image here in this first section is one of shared resilience. Shared resilience. He says in verse 12, a threefold cord is not quickly broken. He gives this proverb, right? 3 strands or one strand is weak. 2 strands, that's an improvement. And 3 make a rope even stronger. And this makes sense, right? 3 is more than 1. But the point isn't the number. The point is in the braiding. A life braided with others, braided with truth, braided with brothers and sisters, braided with spiritual friends. It's extraordinarily resilient. In preparing, reading through this section, I called up my brother, who's an engineer, because I kind of wanted to talk to him about this to make sure I was thinking about this rightly. And I learned that at times, a braided rope or a braided cable can be slightly stronger than the sum of its parts. Not always, but sometimes. And that's because these parts are able to lean on each other. These strands, when they're bound together, actually lean on that. But more than that, a cord made up of 3 strands, 3 braided strands, or strands twisted tightly together, over time with repeated use, they're much more durable than just 3 parallel ropes going kind of in the same general direction. That's why they're braided together or cable is twisted together. There's a mutual protection that comes with the close contact. They guard each other from failing. But I worry, though, that in our living of the Christian life, we live less like braided cables and we live more like cars on the interstate. I want you to see this picture. Cars on the interstate driving in our parallel lanes, sometimes driving close to one another. And I'm afraid that we can fool ourselves at times because we can see each other on the road, pull up next to each other, wave, and continue on our way, and believe that we're living the Christian life together. This isn't a braided life, though. It's not a life that truly intersects. It's just life lived next to each other. It's self-reliance. A solitary life, even a strong one, is still fragile. One hardship can snap us. One temptation, one season of suffering, one crushing loss, one bump in the road can send us off. The teacher here isn't being dramatic because, friends, if you walk alone, you will break alone. Some of us, even right now, are asking God for strength when God offers us his people. We're asking God for help, but we're not seeing the helpers that God has already placed around us. We're asking God for resilience, but we're insulating ourselves from the relationships that would help us to be resilient. Friends, the wise life begins in community. Before the teacher speaks on how to relate to life or how we relate to God, he starts with how we relate to one another. He places this horizontal plane because it's often the one we can relate to the most. He's going to get to God in a second, but he begins with the horizontal. He reminds us that God has made us this way. He reminds us that life requires community, but connection alone isn't enough. A life can be full of people. It's still chaotic, restless, and disordered. So the teacher moves here from who we walk with to how we walk. Go with me to verse 13. He's going to go to the rhythms, the pace, and the cadence of a meaningful life. He says in verse 13, better was a poor, wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been born poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end of all the people, all of whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and a striving after the wind. The teacher says that wisdom is cadence in life. He urges us toward connection, and then he turns also to cadence, the rhythms, the seasons, the humble posture of a wise life. Here, the focus shifts from who you walk with to how you navigate the times. Ecclesiastes has been teaching us that life under the sun has a rhythm to it, has seasons that come and go, opportunities that rise and fall, roles that are given and taken away. Foolishness ignores and misreads these seasons. Wisdom accepts them. So the teacher gives us this living parable. He gives us this parable and says, better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. He says, foolishness resists the season that it's in. Here's this king. He's aged, he's old, he's powerful, he's secure, yet he utterly lacks teachability. He has authority, but he can't be corrected. He's lived long, but he's not grown wise. His age has increased, but his humility is dried up. And really, very sadly, this is actually the trajectory of the life of King Solomon. Elsewhere in the Old Testament, King Solomon, as he grows old, he surrounds himself with women from peoples who don't worship the Lord. His heart is led astray. He allows idols and centers of worship to be built to false gods within his kingdom. One of the wisest men to ever live becomes a fool because he doesn't maintain his vigilance in his old age. The teacher says that man is a fool. The cadence of his life has stalled. His season is shifted, but he refuses to shift with it. He clings to pride, to control, to past glory. Wisdom recognizes that seasons change, and so must we. The teacher says that seasons rise and fall, and wisdom accepts their coming and their going. In verses 14 through 16, he says of this youth, "For he went from prison to the throne, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him." A poor youth ascends to influence. The nation rallies around him. The crowds swell with excitement. But eventually the passion fades. A new generation rises who prefers someone else. His seasons pass. This isn't cynicism, it's realism. Nothing lasts forever. No influence is permanent. No position can sustain your identity. What's the teacher doing here? He's showing us that the life under the sun is restless. Power is temporary. Influence is temporary. Approval of others is fickle. If we build our identity on a moment, on a season, or on the applause of others, we're going to either feel nostalgic constantly or bitter. The wise person accepts seasons as they come, sees the season that the Lord has put them in for what it is. The wise person lets go of a season when it comes to an end. A wise person doesn't cling to positions that God has removed. They don't panic when the spotlight shifts. We talked about seasons a few weeks ago in Ecclesiastes, and I wonder if you've had time to think about what season does the Lord have you in? What season are you coming out of? A good question to ask is whether we're resisting the season that the Lord has placed us in. Where are you clinging to something that the Lord is gently removing? Where are your eyes looking back to a past season rather than being present in the season that you're in? Some of us are grieving a past season, a younger self, a different role, a fading influence, and in that grief, we lose the ability to be present in what God is giving us now. Wisdom doesn't romanticize the past or demand that the present change. Wisdom looks at the season that God has given us and says, what does faithfulness look like here? Wisdom begins with connection. Here, wisdom continues with cadence, a humble embrace of the seasons. But this is not enough. We need more than community and rhythm. We need God himself. And so that's where the teacher turns now to the heart of wisdom. He turns to our communion with God. Communion with God. Chapter 5, verse 1 says, "Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. For a dream comes with much business, and a fool's voice with many words. When you vow a vow to God, do not delay paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you owe. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For when dreams increase and words grow many, there is vanity, but God is the one you must fear." If the first point that the teacher makes deals with relationships, and the second point that the teacher makes deals with how we move through time, point 3 here centers, it says that all of life, our meaning, centers it on our relationship with God himself. When all of the fog of vanity clears, when the teacher strips away all of the illusions of life under the sun, what remains is not a philosophy, not a technique, not a moral code, but a person. The only way to build a meaningful life, a life rooted in wisdom, is to build it on communion with God. First, the teacher says that wisdom approaches God with reverent attentiveness. Reverent attentiveness. He says, guard your steps when you go to the house of the Lord. He takes us here into the temple, the place where it was said that heaven and earth meet. And he says, your cadence in life ultimately shows itself in how you approach God. Guard your steps, draw near to listen. Don't be rash with your mouth. Let your words be few. At this time, the temple was the center of worship for God's people. It was the physical place that God commanded them to go and to worship. And we don't see the same thing said of physical buildings, physical church buildings in the New Testament. So we should understand that what the teacher is talking about here is anytime we come to worship God, especially corporate worship with God's people. The teacher points out that many of us, we live these frantic lives of activity, hurried lives, and we carry that same chaotic energy into God's presence. But the teacher says this, that wisdom begins with listening, quietness, stillness, reverence. The teacher warns us against the sacrifice of fools. What is that? What's the sacrifice of fools? Is it writing a check that's too big? Is it writing a check that's too small? No. The sacrifice of fools is many meaningless words, empty words, words meant for show or to make ourselves feel more spiritual. Verse 3, it says, a fool's voice with many words, and it describes a spirituality where noise replaces nearness, where talking replaces trust, where religion becomes performance. Jesus quotes the words of Isaiah in front of the supposed religious leaders of his day, saying, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me. Wisdom draws near to God to receive and to listen, to enjoy his presence. When was the last time that you sat in the presence of God and listened? Listened. Not to explain yourself, not to negotiate, but to be quiet because he is God. Some of us, and I know I am guilty of this very frequently, we live at such an unsustainable pace. Our cadence is frantic. Our souls have no margin. And when our rhythm of life is out of sync, our spiritual life becomes noisy, sometimes thin. But wisdom calls us back to moments of silence and pause and reflection. Communion with God begins with attentiveness and not activity. The teacher warns against a spiritual life full of promises that we don't intend to keep, promises of I'll do more, I'll do better, and next week, I'll do more, I'll do better. The teacher here commands us these things because it's rooted in the character and work of God. Last week, I said that one of the names that we have for God is the God who speaks. And when God speaks, he tells the truth. When he says he's going to do something, he fulfills his promises. God always fulfills the promises that he makes. And so when we make promises to the Lord and we keep those promises, we're participating in who God actually is. Verses 6 and 7, the teacher says that wisdom rejects performance. He says, let not your mouth lead you into sin. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? He has this portrait of religious hypocrisy where lips speak with devotion, but our heart is far away. The danger here is not that God is easily offended, but that our empty religion actually damages our soul. When we talk a spiritual game and we don't follow it up, our integrity erodes, our conscience is dulled, our faith becomes like a performance instead of communion. God doesn't want your polished words. He wants a truthful heart, an honest heart. The teacher is confronting this spiritual performance He uses these phrases, when dreams increase, when words grow many. He says that's vanity, noise without substance, activity without communion. This verse is actually the climax here. Dreams mean illusions, the stories we tell ourselves to avoid dealing with God as he is. These words that the teacher mentions are the noise that we fill our lives with instead of hearing the voice of God. The teacher says all of this is vanity. When the spiritual fog clears, one thing remains. One thing remains. God is God is the one that you must fear. We spoke about a few weeks ago about the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord isn't terror that drives us away. It's not terror that drives us away. It's actually a reverent awe that draws us in worship. It's surrendered trust. It's a deep recognition that God is God and I am not. The fear of the Lord, the fear of the Lord frees you from pretending, frees you from trying to control outcomes or manage appearances. The fear of the Lord is your soul's peace. The fear of the Lord brings communion. Communion brings meaning, and meaning brings rest. Up to this point, the teacher has shown us glimpses of wisdom. In fact, in all of Ecclesiastes, glimpses of wisdom. He's shown us that wisdom looks like a life that's connected with others, that it's a life that is steadfast and humble, a life that is lived before God's face. But as Ecclesiastes has done, as it often does, the teacher here is leaving us with a hunger that he cannot satisfy on his own. He gives us the shape of wisdom, the outline, but not the fullness of it. He gives us the longing for something more, but not yet the arrival. And that's where the story of Scripture, especially the story that we remember each Advent, meets the ache of Ecclesiastes. Because when the teacher looks at a world filled with isolation, instability, and irreverence, Advent, the season of Advent leading up to the celebration of Jesus' birth, Advent announces that God has stepped into this world. When Ecclesiastes says that two are better than one and a threefold cord is not quickly broken, we see the deepest expression of that in the wisdom that Jesus is not merely our companion, but he is, as we sang today, Emmanuel, God with us. He is the friend who draws near in our weakness, the brother who lifts the fallen, warms the cold, and binds up the lonely. In his birth, Jesus enters our human condition to restore the very connections that Ecclesiastes longs for. And when Ecclesiastes points to the rise and fall of leaders, Advent reminds us that the true king came in a way that no one expected. He wasn't as a political rising star. He wasn't a young prodigy that gained a following. He came as a child in a manger. And unlike the fickle crowds of Ecclesiastes 4 who cheered a king today and forgot all about him the next day, the reign of Jesus is steady, unshakable, and eternal. He is the wise king whose kingdom will never pass away. And when Ecclesiastes urges us to approach God with reverence, to watch our steps, to guard our words, the season of Advent announces that the holy God we fear has drawn close to us in grace. The one who is infinitely above took on flesh to walk among us. Jesus came with the perfect fear of the Lord, the perfect obedience, the perfect communion, and it's that communion that he came to share with us. And so, because of him, we don't just come to God cautiously. We don't come to God cautiously. Instead, we are warmly welcomed as his sons and daughters. So the teacher gives us that sketch of wisdom. Jesus gives us the substance. The teacher shows us our need. Jesus shows us God's answer. The teacher points us upward. Jesus came down. At the season of Advent, we remember the moment that life above the sun broke into life under the sun. In his incarnation, the longing of Ecclesiastes meets its fulfillment in the gospel. And in Christ, we are given the power and the presence to become the people that Ecclesiastes describes, people connected in love, paced in wisdom, and living in communion with our God. In the early chapters of Ecclesiastes, everything has fallen apart. Pleasure, work, wealth, control, life under the sun felt like vapor slipping through our fingers. Life under the sun felt like chasing the wind. But right here in these verses in chapters 4 and 5, there's this little patch of clarity. The teacher shows us what it looks like to build back a life that matters. A meaningful life is not built on what the world celebrates. A meaningful life is not built on accomplishment or applause or accumulation. It's built on wisdom, and that wise life looks like connection with others because you and I are made to belong. The wise life looks like proper cadence in life because seasons come and go. And it looks like communion with God because He alone gives weight and meaning to our days. He alone is worthy of our worship and our pursuit. Maybe you feel like the teacher, the beginning of Ecclesiastes, watching things fade, feeling the emptiness of familiar pursuits. Maybe you feel like you are standing in front of a blank slate, unsure how to rebuild, how to move forward. Where do I go from here? Start here. Start with people. Start with slowing down. Start with drawing close to God. Let the meaningless things fall away and let wisdom rebuild what truly lasts. A life full of connection, rhythm, and the steady, beautiful presence of the God above the sun.